need to worry about him.
You want someone to say?
Here, Chris.
That'd be great. I think.
Like right now?
Voice.
Right
I
now?
can hear you.
Everyone.
Hello, everyone. We just want to let you know that we will begin in 5 minutes. We will begin in 5 minutes.
Check one.
Good morning. If everybody could please come in, take your seats, either up here in the front rows or join us at a round table. We're going to start momentarily. Okay. Good morning. On behalf of Waterfront Toronto and the Sidewalk Labs team, welcome to our public roundtable on the Sidewalk Toronto project. Now, this session is being recorded live and will be available on both the Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk Toronto Facebook and YouTube channels. I want to welcome the viewers who are joining online and watching through the live stream right now. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be with us here this Saturday morning. My name is Lou Rose Mercader, and I'm the Communications and Public Engagement Manager at Waterfront Toronto. Now, before we begin, Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk Labs recognizes that this land we now call Toronto has been the site of human activity for 15,000 years. It is a traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations. This land is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, which asks us to care for and share peacefully in the resources around the Great Lakes. We are mindful of the history of broken treaties and of the urgent need to work continuously towards reconciliation. And we are grateful for the opportunity to live and work this land. Our agenda for today is as follows. This plenary session will run for approximately 1 hour, where you will hear from Waterfront Toronto, the City of Toronto's Waterfront Secretariat, and our innovation and funding partner for Quayside, Sidewalk Labs. We will then move towards a series of 4 breakout sessions focused on the Quayside site plan and transportation, social infrastructure, housing affordability, digital governance, and sustainability. These 4 identical sessions will be available starting at 10:40 a.m., 11:40 a.m., 3:10 p.m., and 4 p.m. Now, since our last roundtable held in mid-August, it's about 100 days ago, we have been focused on reaching out across the city. We've been listening, we've been learning, we've been engaging with you through a number of public engagements. And the feedback we received through these consultations and reports have helped shape the work of Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk Labs, and our teams have been planning this Quayside neighborhood. I just want to run through some high-level things that came out of that engagement process. And one of the first ones was the Residents Reference Panel, who released an interim report that identified a series of guiding values and opportunities in 6 areas. And they focused on public oversight and innovation, an accessible and inclusive public realm, safe, efficient mobility options, responsible data use, being smart and sustainable, inclusive and affordable. And I know in the audience here today, we have a few members of the reference panel, and I wanted to thank them for all their hard work. And we're looking forward to your final report in the new year. We also received the Fellows' final report, which included 27 recommendations based on their research trips to 5 North American and European cities. The highlight of the report included setting ambitious targets for affordable housing, a detailed recommendations on a civic data trust, and partnering with our Indigenous communities in the design and programming of Quayside. And I understand that we have some of our fellows here today as well, and they're available outside to answer your questions and to also speak more about the report. So I encourage you to go over there and meet with them. Finally, those 2 reports are also available online on our website, so come visit us on sidewalktoronto.ca. Now, finally, in September, we hosted a series of intimate workshops called Design Jams. Nearly 100 community members and subject matter experts sat with members of our project team, and they helped advance some of the initial thinking on vertical living, water connections, and people on wheels. Recommendations included strategies to building a strong sense of community for everyone, breaking down physical and social barriers to accessing the waterfront, and building a dedicated network of separated bike lanes. Now, I'd like to invite David Stonehouse, the Director, Waterfront Secretariat, to provide us with an overview of the City of Toronto's role in this process. Let's welcome David.
Good morning and welcome on behalf of the City of Toronto and my colleagues with the federal and provincial governments. As you know, the city and the federal and provincial governments, through a government staff coordinating body known as the Waterfront Revitalization Initiative Intergovernmental Steering Committee, is closely monitoring this project. Speaking on behalf of the city, as Sidewalk Labs develops the Master Innovation and Development Plan, city staff, from many divisions are providing preliminary input for the purpose of shaping proposals that reflect city goals, policies, and regulations. Eventually, when Sidewalk Labs and Waterfront Toronto present the MIDP, city staff will undertake a comprehensive review of the document. We will analyze the desirability of the various proposals, as well as the regulatory and city council approvals that will be required for any future implementation. Staff from many divisions will be involved, including the Chief Information Officer. This evaluation process will include city-led public and stakeholder meetings, including meetings specifically dedicated to data issues. Following this, city staff will prepare a report for committee and city council with an analysis of the plan and with associated recommendations. We have not yet seen a draft MIDP, but I think that it is safe to say that many city council approvals, each with their own opportunities for public input, will be required for any future implementation. For example, almost all of what you will see today will be subject to development applications under the Ontario Planning Act. We anticipate that the staff report will go to committee in September or October of 2019, but this will depend on the schedule of Sidewalk Labs and Waterfront Toronto. Thank you.
David, thank you so much to the City of Toronto and for the continued support of our partnership in revitalizing our waterfront. I'd now like to introduce Meg Davis, our Chief Development Officer at Waterfront Toronto, and she will be walking us through a presentation on how we can realize our waterfront potential. Let's welcome Meg.
Thanks, Lee Rose. And I also wanted to thank David on behalf of the city for coming this morning and explaining the very important role governments have in this project. So today is about looking ahead. We're going to present some very compelling materials to you. We're excited to do that with Sidewalk Labs and see what your reaction is throughout the day. But before we get started on Waterfront Toronto's role in this project, I wanted to talk a little bit about the events of this week. It has not been an easy week for Waterfront Toronto, for those of you who have kept up with social media and the newspapers. On Wednesday, the Auditor General released her annual report, and of 14 agencies, Waterfront Toronto was one of those, and we've been working with the auditor since January on that effort. We found that the auditor's recommendations were very constructive, and we're well on our way to implementing all of them. I wanted to talk about 3 elements of her report that she highlighted, and just to make some quick notes of clarification. Firstly, with respect to market soundings, this project isn't about procuring photocopy paper or pens. This is a very complicated project and one that's very important to the city and the province and, in fact, the country. So we needed to do what we call market soundings, where we go out to the market and we test ideas, we look for interest. We want to create a market space where we can get as many bidders as possible. So we did that. We spoke with over 50 companies in the process of leading up to the RFP. It helped us shape our RFP and what we were looking for, and brought a lot of players to the table. So I wanted to comment on that. The second one is about information that was shared prior to the RFP. As part of the market soundings, it's very common to provide information that is both publicly available or readily available through us as a public agency. So we did that. We provided a lot of different pieces of information to different companies who were interested in Quayside, and we did so quite readily, and that is part of a good procurement process. And then finally, on the last item that I wanted to highlight from the AG's report, which is that the RFP was rushed. And in fact, the auditor focused on the first phase of the RFP, which is where we sort of qualify the bidders. The process itself was a 2-part process, and it in fact was 158 days. It's the second longest procurement we've ever done at Waterfront Toronto. And in fact, not one of the bidders that were in the process asked for an extension on time. And that happens quite frequently in our processes. And whenever we're asked for an extension, we always give it. So just wanted to be clear on that. It was not a rushed process. And finally, on behalf of all of my colleagues at Waterfront Toronto, I wanted to thank our members of the board who are departing, Helen Burston and Merrick Gertler. Their years of service on our board, guiding revitalization on the waterfront has been invaluable to not only Waterfront Toronto, but to Torontonians, Ontarians, and Canadians. So we thank them for that. And we're also very happy that Michael Nobrega, our acting CEO, will stay on with us as interim CEO, and his steady hand is guiding the corporation, give everyone some comfort there. A CEO search is underway, but Michael's going to stay with us for the foreseeable future. So thank you, Michael. He does this as volunteer work, just so you know. So on with the day. I'm technically challenged, so bear with me. And first day with the new glasses, so definitely bear with me. You're going to see some great ideas today. We're really excited about this. We haven't seen a business or implementation plan yet, so just keep that in mind. Things will roll and evolve, and we'll be back to you with lots of ideas and iterations on this. So Waterfront Toronto, as you all know, has been working to revitalize the waterfront, and we do so to bring vitality and thriving neighborhoods to life. Our mandate is given to us from all three levels of government. Our resources, though, come from both the public and the private sector, so we don't rely just on government funding. And every decision that we make is to bring our vision of one vibrant waterfront for everyone. So we have a number of roles. I know a lot of you have been with Waterfront Toronto for a long time and understand this, but there are probably some folks here who are new to Waterfront Toronto, and I want to just explain a little bit. We're a catalyst and a steward. You know, we build roads, we build beautiful parks and public spaces so that people are interested in coming down to the waterfront. We're also the revitalization lead. We make sure that the communities are built with all the mix of uses that are required, the community services, the schools, et cetera. And we are a landowner in this case. But we're also a partner. We leverage the expertise of others in order to deliver all of our projects, whether those are our government partners, our private sector development partners, or other government or non-government agencies, nonprofits such as Artscape, who are building 80 affordable housing units on the waterfront. We also don't just sell land to the highest bidder. We've been charged with revitalizing mostly government land, some of which Waterfront Toronto owns, but mostly the city and the province. And so we are guided by public policy. We look to, through brownfield redevelopment, reducing urban sprawl, raising the bar on sustainability, increasing affordable housing in a very measurable way, creating beautiful parks and public spaces for everyone, so that's not just for the folks who live in the waterfront, expanding transit and gaining more access to the waterfront for everyone. And all of this is being driven by economic competitiveness. We measure our progress very rigorously. We do a corporate social responsibility report, which gets issued biannually. It was issued 2 weeks ago. I encourage you to look at this report. It's very exciting. It's a triple bottom line: environment, social, and economic. And just a couple of highlights on this. We have 24 LEED Gold or LEED Platinum buildings either constructed or underway. And we announced 2 weeks ago the flood protection project construction start that will unlock 1,000 acres plus of developable land and protect other lands that have already been developed in Toronto. On the social aspect, we've done nearly 500 affordable housing units, 80 are underway, and we have over 1,000 planned just in East Bayfront and West Don Lands alone. On the economic side, we've returned approximately $4.1 billion to the Canadian economy, and we've created over 14,000 person-years of employment thus far. So let's start on Quayside. You know, Waterfront Toronto owns most of Quayside. The city owns a portion of it, and there's a small privately owned piece. And when we looked at what we wanted to do with Quayside, we thought about it a little bit differently than when we were taking city or provincial land out to market. We thought, what can we do to really move the dial on things like sustainability, mobility, and affordability. And we wanted to take more of a revolutionary step than an evolutionary step. In so doing, we decided to issue an RFP for an innovation and funding partner, somebody who could help us think differently, do deep research, and could afford to help us with that. So we developed the RFP, and it focused on a number of objectives: sustainability, resiliency, and urban innovation, and really becoming a globally significant demonstration project on sustainability. Complete communities, as we always do, that brilliant mix of uses, community services, vibrant public spaces, et cetera. Economic development and prosperity, really a test bed for Canadian companies to see if they could bring their technologies to scale and give them that opportunity. And then partnership and investment. Obviously, Waterfront Toronto needs to have income in order to do the revitalization, to build the parks and the open spaces and all the servicing. So we need to have, an opportunity to pay for those things, and not always rely on government funding for that. So you'll see here, Quayside is the yellow sort of L shape in the middle of the map. The red outline is the designated waterfront area, and I wanted to clarify that a little bit for you. It's about 2,000 acres, half of which is already developed, a large portion of which is in the Portlands and not yet flood protected. So there is a number of acres with the East Bayfront and the West Donlands, which we had carriage of, that we have been developing very rigorously over the last decade. And it's a context piece, the designated waterfront area. Quayside is not an island. And when planning it, it needs to stitch back into the urban fabric. We need to see how we link to pedestrian, cycling, and transit. And so we use the designated waterfront area as the context for thinking about Quayside. So Quayside, here's a little closer up shot. As you can see, construction's well underway on a number of other projects that Waterfront Toronto has been partnering with other developers on. So we are going to receive from Sidewalk a Master Innovation and Development Plan, affectionately known as the MIDP. And we ran a very fair and transparent RFP process. It was extremely rigorous. We're going to do the same thing with the MIDP. In fact, we've got KPMG, Arup, and Enberry Lyon Consulting and others helping us with setting up the evaluation framework. And we will have a number of experts helping us, external experts, subject matter experts, to help us with those evaluations. And all of this needs to be in the public interest. That is first and foremost in our mind as we take on this evaluation. And it will be evaluated by Waterfront Toronto, but also we are, as David mentioned, consulting very closely with our government partners. We are briefing them on a regular basis. We are sharing the information, and we'll be sharing our evaluations and getting their input as part of that. And so if we decide to move forward with the MIDP, there will be lots of additional agreements, as David said, and additional approvals that will be required. So lots of public engagement still yet to come. I don't want anyone to feel like you're going to time out, that this is the second last roundtable. There'll be lots and lots more opportunity. So in building the evaluation framework, we really were looking at how many of our goals and objectives and how well will the MIDP meet those goals and objectives. Does the MIDP align with the current planning framework? We've spent 5 years with the city very closely doing planning work for the areas on the waterfront. And is the proposed business plan and implementation plan viable and in the public interest? That's really, really important to us. It has to be viable and implementable. We used a 5-step process to create our evaluation framework. We looked at our corporate objectives through our mandate, our RFP objectives, government policy and strategy review that we undertook, and we looked at key priorities and third-party due diligence and metrics. So we've got those external folks helping us set this up. And really, we came out with an evaluation framework that has 3 parts. It has the goals and objectives and the evaluation criteria that we will measure. It has an evaluation of the development plan that you're going to see today when Jesse comes up. And then a very robust financial business case analysis and implementation review. So really, we wanted to define what we were looking for, and Sidewalk is going to come forward with a proposal on how we're going to achieve those outcomes. So we set a series of goals and objectives. You're going to see these in great detail in the breakout session. So I'm not going to get into too much detail on these today. And then we have some implementation requirements on how we want Sidewalk to move forward. So briefly on the priority outcomes, these are what we call our must-haves. Job creation and economic development. So opportunities, as I said, for Canadian companies. Sustainability and climate positive, or achieving, advancing climate positive initiatives. Housing affordability, a minimum is to meet or exceed our obligations to our government partners, but also to propose additional purpose-built rental and opportunities for different tenures, as well as addressing middle income. On new mobility, we're very interested in electronic vehicles, but we're also interested in what opportunities there might be in the future of autonomous vehicles. And then, of course, the connection to transit, that last mile. And then urban innovations, there will be things that we think Sidewalk will propose that we didn't actually ask for, that might be of huge interest and benefit to the project, in the public interest, and to Torontonians. So we want to be able to evaluate those as well. In terms of implementation requirements, these are the things we need Sidewalk to do. I'll talk about data privacy in a minute. Public engagement. We want, of course, to continue the deep involvement of the community that we, as Waterfront Toronto, have always aspired to. Go way beyond statutory requirements for public engagement, but also a plan for the feedback loop. Once people are living in Quayside, how do they feel about it? Is it working? And we need that sort of deep engagement as we go forward. Local developer participation. This is something we're pushing Sidewalk on. We're very, this is very important to the project. We have one of the most incredible development communities in the world, very, very experienced, and we need to take on that experience and bring that to the table. So we're asking Sidewalk to consider that. Design excellence, of course, we have our design review panel that will all be part of the process. They have a meeting, I think, next week. And then the partnership model. Obviously, as I said, Waterfront Toronto needs to ensure that this is economically viable and returns benefits to the public and the public sector. Just on data governance, Christina Werner is here. She's going to be running the data breakout session. She's going to give you a lot more detail, but I wanted to highlight this one because it seems to be incredibly important. Well, it is incredibly important, and we are addressing it head on. So we're looking to Quayside. You know, we're sort of hosts of this conversation. We've never said we were the experts at this. We've brought lots of experts to the table. We want to host the conversation. We want governments and we want experts to help us figure this out. So really, it's a venue for moving forward on this agenda. So new global standard for data governance, compliance obviously with all existing laws, but we want to go beyond that. Meaningful consent on data collection, data minimization, collecting as little data as possible to make projects work. Data security and privacy. So we have committed very publicly not to share personal information with third parties, Alphabet companies, Google companies, we've said that, not to be used for advertising, and to have privacy by design embedded. And Sidewalk is on side with all of these things. And then a commitment to accountability on ethical use of technology and shared benefits of data. So Christina will give you a little bit more information on that breakout session. So to wrap up, we really are about accountability and transparency. I think those of you who know us well understand this. The feedback that we get from all of you informs the plan as it goes forward. It also informs how we evaluate the plan. And I want to assure you that we will be listening very carefully. Before we receive the MIDP, we are sharing these criteria. We've already shared it with our Quayside Stakeholder Advisory Committee, the Waterfront for All, our government partners. The Digital Strategy Advisory Panel will be reviewing these next week, and ultimately the evaluation framework will be approved by our board in the new year. So I want to assure you that this is a very robust evaluation process. Finally, here's a look at the timeline. This is the current timeline that we have. Obviously, public consultation will continue throughout, as well will be consultation with our government partners. We anticipate having a draft of the MIDP around the end of the first quarter, early of the second quarter, and then a final proposal on the MIDP sort of at the end of the second quarter, and that will include public feedback. Then Waterfront Toronto will do a detailed evaluation and bring that back to our government partners for their input, and then ultimately to our board should we decide to proceed. And then, as David mentioned, the city will have its own public consultation process for you all to participate in. And beyond that, what I want to say is if we decide to move into implementation of the MIDP, there will be a series of agreements that will need to be executed and approved by governments, Waterfront Toronto's board. And then there will be the series of approvals that David talked about, not only at the city level, but at the federal and the provincial level as well. And Sidewalk clearly understands all this, so that's great. And with that, I am turning it back to Lou Rose to continue on.
Thank you so much, Meg. And we're going to invite you back after for our question and answer period. I'd now like to introduce Jesse Shapins, the Director of Public Realm at Sidewalk Labs, who will present the draft Quayside plan. Jesse.
Great. Thanks, Rose. Well, thank you. Let's see, which microphone should I use? I gotta pick one. I'm gonna take this one. I'm gonna move around a little bit. Well, thank you everyone again for coming out on a Saturday morning, beautiful snowy day to spend time to really kind of participate and provide your input on this important project. So as we were talking about here, we're really excited to share the draft plan for Quayside. This has really been an evolution over the course of the last year. All the public input that has been given into this project, we hope that you're starting to see a lot of that come together in the detailed plans that we're now starting to share. Before diving into the plan though, I did just want to provide a brief reminder on who Sidewalk Labs is and why we're here. So our mission, as you can read up here, is to combine urban design with technology to take on the challenges that are facing great cities like Toronto today. Challenges like sustainability, affordability, mobility, and economic development. And this approach is fundamentally rooted in creating inclusive neighborhoods, the type of complete communities that Meg spoke about in the Waterfront Toronto has been building. What we focus on is really focusing on people. None of this is tech for tech's sake. What you're gonna see today, is nothing like a science fiction like the Jetsons or some kind of dystopia like Black Mirror. That's not at all what we're about. That's not about what we wanna do at Quayside. As I said, it really is about starting with people. We really recognize that the built environment and the social environment, it's fundamental to community well-being, and that's the heart of what we do in our work. We start with people, residents, visitors, workers, and everything that we do. Part of this is also a commitment to ensuring that historically disadvantaged groups have access to jobs and that we really have diversity in any of our procurement processes. This also includes commitments to affordable housing, which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today, but also affordable transportation, retail, and food options. It includes a commitment to Indigenous reconciliation, and includes commitments to ensuring that the neighborhood is accessible for all. And I did also just want to share a little bit about Sidewalk's role. It's important to understand how we work and sort of who we are as an organization. Really what we're focused on is developing a financial model for the public and the private sector to work together to create the type of inclusive community I've described. The role that we then play can be tied to contributing to innovative infrastructure. It can be tied to enabling technologies that improve quality of life. It can be tied to focusing on catalyzing economic development. And it can also involve limited real estate. As Meg pointed out, we are also very excited to and plan to work with local development partners. The long-term interest of Sidewalk is not to be a real estate development company. In the context of Quayside, we might take on some development because we were comfortable taking on a significant risk to prove out and demonstrate that this is a financially viable, replicable model to have this type of impact. And so as Meg has outlined, you've heard these significant kind of priority outcomes that Waterfront Toronto has put forward. We think this is a fantastic evaluation framework, and this is something that we have found clear, inspiring, and is really the structure that has been driving our work. So I wanted to kind of walk you through, before we get into the details of the site plan itself, the specific initiatives that we are proposing for Quayside that we believe can help achieve and maybe even exceed some of these ambitious goals that Waterfront has set out. It is really these public policy outcomes that are driving all of our work. So let's start with job creation and economic development. So in the Quayside project, we believe that this can alone create over 9,000 new construction jobs in Ontario, and that the neighborhood itself can be home to 4,000 new jobs. One of the major things that catalyzes this is tall timber construction. You might have heard a lot about this already. It's something that we're incredibly excited about. Many people are. This is something that is just such an exciting time in the construction industry. It's just crazy. We can actually build tall buildings now out of wood that are safe and sturdy. And what's incredible is that this is something that has actually been, to date, primarily led by Europe. Whereas in Canada, this is just such an extraordinary opportunity for us. And that this project alone can really, really catalyze the Ontario industry to become a world leader. And I want to be clear, this is not just about the material. Wood itself is fantastic. It is a far more sustainable material, contribute to affordability. But this whole process is enabled by digital technology as well, from the front end of digital design through fabrication, and will really showcase and put Ontario at the forefront of this growing industry. In addition to this, we see at Quayside growing the innovation cluster that has already been developing along Queen's Quay, seeing an Urban Innovation Institute developed with local partnerships with the research universities here in Toronto, really catalyzing the growth of that community. In addition to support all of these jobs, the development plan that we're bringing forward really looks at a different balance of spaces, more space for non-residential uses. This is not going to be just a condo community. This really is about demonstrating how, as jobs grow in the downtown of Toronto, we can combine that with housing and truly create a complete community. And then one last piece of this is that the ground floor spaces are actually really important. These are where the small businesses that we all love and are so important to our communities can thrive. And so we're taking a different approach because retail is changing and treating these ground floor spaces more like open markets, as opposed to places that are built just for kind of the select global retailers that can afford the commitments for very long-term leases. We're making those spaces open and flexible so you can have many, many new businesses get started in this area. Let's talk about the goal of climate positive. Here at Quayside, we believe that we can achieve 75 to 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to the standard development. This would be a huge accomplishment. Waterfront has already been doing so much to lead in sustainability, and this would take that even further. In the case of Quayside, the average resident would produce 7 times less CO2 than the other residents on average in Toronto. This would set a new global standard, and I think something really significant for the city. The way that we would do this is first focusing on how we get around. We would focus on transit, walking, and cycling, reducing car trips, producing fewer emissions. Next, focus on our energy sources, focusing on clean energy. So with this neighborhood, for the heating and cooling, would not use any natural gas. We would be using waste heat recovery. We'd be using a geothermal system and tying that as well into an advanced power grid with solar panels on all the buildings, as well as battery storage in the buildings as well. That would then also be connected to how we manage that energy more effectively. This is actually a great example of how very concretely digital technology can improve our life in cities. Right now, the way that energy is managed is all independently. Each space in each building, each system is separate. What we can do here is actually look at that holistically and use advances in artificial intelligence such that we can manage those spaces proactively. We can see that a space isn't being used. We can ensure that there's not the energy being sent there. And overall, that can reduce the amount of energy in a building by 20%. In addition, there's the materials. We've talked about timber. We're also using extensive cradle-to-cradle materials and meeting Toronto Tier 3 standards in terms of our building construction. And in addition, climate positive isn't just about energy. It's also about waste and water. The average apartment building in Toronto today, only 27% of the waste is recycled or composted. This is far, far too low. And we believe in Quayside, we could get that number to 80% by really looking at how to improve the whole waste and recycling stream. And in addition, on the water side, we all know that flooding is an increasing risk and challenge for our city. And this is another case where we can actually use a combination of urban design and technology, I think, really effectively. What we would do here in Quayside is look at a district-wide stormwater approach that includes green and blue roofs, significant green infrastructure in all of our streets and parks and public realm. And then what we can do is also use sensors on the pipes in the water systems that can be connected to weather data so that when we know that there's a storm coming, all of the system can empty those kind of cisterns and pipes proactively, allowing for maximum capacity. This really reduces the risks of flooding and the overall resiliency of the neighborhood. Let's talk about another one of the top objectives that Waterfront has put forward, affordable housing in a complete community. We're really excited about being able to put forward to you today our proposal for what we see as a significant contribution to a new model for how we can actually build new, inclusive, mixed income communities. In this neighborhood, we would have 40% below market housing. So we do this in a couple of different ways. There would be 20% affordable housing, meeting the official plan requirements. Inside of that 20%, 5% of that would be specifically deep affordable, so really kind of meeting and serving the needs of lower income communities and working with experienced local nonprofits to deliver that. And we would then go beyond this. We would really then focus as well on the middle income families that are increasingly being pushed out of the city and having a hard time living in Toronto today. So we'd have 20% of the housing dedicated to middle income housing for those communities. Overall, only half of the buildings, the units in Quayside would be condos. The other half would all be purpose-built rental. This is a dramatically different mix than what is common today, and we think can make a huge impact in demonstrating how, again, we can make new mixed income communities in this city. Part of making this possible is actually reducing construction costs. The timber approach that I mentioned at scale is able to reduce those construction costs by 15%, allowing us to kind of achieve some of these affordability goals, as well as sort of the approach to design of these spaces. In addition, housing is not the only part of creating an inclusive and complete community. It's also really important to think about all of the different people. That's, again, the commitment to accessibility, as well as supporting families. And the public realm here is a really important part of this as well. Having an expanded public realm that is really for all ages, so families and people of all backgrounds can live and work and play together in an extraordinary way. And it's also about the community facilities that we can proactively plan in this neighborhood and that can inhabit and support the community. And let's talk about the objective of new mobility, which is really about reducing congestion and improving safety. So one of the key parts of our plan is to support the waterfront expansion of the LRT. We think this is fundamental to this project, and we're really excited to see that happen. In addition, then, we see designing streets here a little bit differently and including technology in that design to really focus on safety, how we can use lighting and pavement and adaptive traffic signals to really reduce any conflicts between pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles. Part of that, of course, if you're changing streets, these are really important. We need to make sure they work for everyone. So part of this has been working very closely with the accessibility community. We've had a partnership with OCAD University's Inclusive Design Center to be running extensive workshops on these new ideas. And we really are excited to not only meet, but also exceed the requirements of the AODA and other requirements to ensure that these new streets are incredibly safe for everyone. So in addition, there will be also great bike and pedestrian infrastructure. We'll share more about the details of Queens Quay, but actually expanding the Martin Goodman Trail, which we all love, but know could even be larger to make sure that all those cyclists can get through. And then looking at ways to not only improve the way that people get around, but also goods and packages. One of the major contributors to congestion on our streets today is all the package deliveries. And so looking at how we can test something new here, where we actually have all packages delivered into one building, sorted and then delivered into the buildings in the neighborhood through robots moving in underground tunnels. And then we've also heard, importantly, about data privacy and digital governance as an implementation requirement, a must-do from Waterfront Toronto, which we strongly, strongly agree with. So we want to make something really clear. We've said this and want to reinforce this. We have no intent to own the urban data collected in this neighborhood. And we've proposed and put forward the idea of creating a civic data trust. This would be a new, entirely third-party, entirely public-led institution. This would be something that Waterfront is now working with Mars on helping to conceive of what such an institution might be. And we believe this is incredibly important and something we're very excited to see come to pass if it can happen here. I've worked my entire career in civic technology and urbanism. I think one of the things that's just so exciting about the Quayside project is the opportunity that we have here in Toronto to actually pioneer and set global standards for how data and digital technologies can truly be governed in the public interest to ensure that they're really improving people's lives. There's great work happening in cities like Barcelona, cities like Amsterdam. We believe that Toronto can be a part of that world-class leadership in this area. And just a few more pieces. I think, Meg mentioned these and the things that we just wanted to reinforce. We will not be sharing any personal data in this place. There's no sharing of data with third parties. That includes other alphabet companies like Google. And data here will not be used for advertising purposes, and privacy by design is embedded in all of our initiatives. Okay, so that's a lot. We're baking a lot of exciting things into how we can achieve these extraordinary objectives that Waterfront Toronto has put forward. And now we want to talk more about some of the details of the physical space and the site plan itself. Again, keep in mind, these are drafts. This is still in progress. None of this is approved by Waterfront or the city. You've had a very clear overview of the extensive process and approvals that all this will go through. But we wanted to get these out in front of you today to get your feedback. And just as reference, the Quayside site, it sits between two existing precinct plans. You have East Bayfront and the Keating Channel as sort of the governing plans for the area. And in terms of the zoning and permissions, the area has a kind of permitted zoning of development of up to 3.3 million gross floor area. And the existing precinct plan had sort of imagined two tall towers up to 45 or 50 stories around Parliament Street, and then some mid-rise buildings in the rest of the neighborhood. And so this is a map that shows Quayside in that broader context. And I think for us, as we've been approaching the planning and design of this neighborhood over the course of the last year, this geographic context and the relationship to the surrounding neighborhoods has been extraordinarily important. Of course, Quayside is sort of an evolution of and building on the incredible work that Waterfront has been doing along the central waterfront and moving kind of close to Quayside. That includes the improvements to Queens Quay for all users that we've seen, incredible parks like Sugar Beach, Sherburne Common, and then the Bayside community that's developing right now. What's really interesting about Quayside is also its relationship to the north and to the east. So, of course, here, you all know the Parliament Street corridor. This is one of the city's most extraordinary streets. And if you think about it, the streets is really kind of the history as well as sort of exceptional kind of diverse communities for which this place can be an extraordinary resource. So if you start at the top of Parliament, you're actually at St. Jamestown up there at Bloor. That is the most dense neighborhood in all of Canada. Over 60% of the residents have been born outside of the country. As you keep walking further down the street, you get to Regent Park and the Cabbagetown. Then you get down to the Distillery District in the St. Lawrence neighborhood, which is itself an extraordinary example, a generation of demonstrating how we can really build mixed income communities. So Quayside really we see as a resource for all of these communities, providing great access to the water and the incredible new parks that are being built at Villiers. And again, you've already heard a bit from Meg, and maybe you're already familiar with the incredible work that's happening out at Villiers Island and the renaturalization of the Don River. I have to say, like, I'm an urbanist nerd, and this is quite possibly one of the coolest projects that is happening in the entire world. The idea that right now in Toronto, an entirely new river is being dug and that a new island is being made in that process, the incredible ecological and social and cultural benefits that this creates is extraordinary. And so we see Quayside is directly connected to that. We want to provide the opportunity for as much connectivity for people to move through Quayside to get to those great new parks. And the Parliament Slip itself is in many ways sort of the terminus of that new incredible ecosystem. It involves all the way to the ravines. It stretches even out to Scarborough when the new Meadoway Park will be created. So that's a lot about the geographic context, but I really wanted to share how important the relationship of Quayside to these surrounding areas is in the way that we've approached the plan. And so this is Quayside today. You can see basically on the west side, you have one new building that has been constructed, the Mon building. On the north, you have Parliament. On the north, you have Lakeshore and the Gardner, Parliament Street coming down. The site then has the Victory Soya Mill silo bounding it on the east side, and then Parliament Slip right there in the middle, Queens Quay moving along the southern side. And so Sidewalk's plan, as we've kind of started to develop it, it builds on the foundation of the precinct plan. It's really furthering the tradition of leading with public realm and embracing new mobility systems. And our approach to creating neighborhoods, it's really about making important assumptions about the future of transportation. We see transit, biking, and cycling as growing, and we believe that car ownership in dense urban areas, as we're already seeing today in Toronto, will continue to drop. And we'll see then the public realm, parks, water access, sidewalks, plazas, as more important than ever in ensuring that there's adequate spaces to support diverse families to live a high quality of life in a dense area. So applying this thinking to Quayside means we're planning for only minimal parking. It means that we're prioritizing transit, biking and walking, and we're providing more public space than previously planned. And so rather than fill in Parliament Slip, what we're interested in is extending Queens Quay as a series of bridges for the LRT, Martin Goodman Trail, and pedestrians. And we also then envision creating a plaza at the top of Parliament Slip that brings water all the way up to Lakeshore. This would create an extraordinary new gathering place for the community. And in many ways, this is taking the wave deck concept that we all love so much from the central waterfront and pushing it even further. The neighborhoods of Toronto have long felt that the lake is at a distance. And so rather than just make it easy and attractive to get down to the waterfront, we'd like to bring the lake up into the city too. And this water plaza, it'll be directly connected to Silo Park. This was part of the precinct plan and will be the green and recreational heart of the community. The bridges here, they seamlessly connect Silo Park to a new community center that's being built at Bayside on the other side of the slip. This creates a great mix of indoor, outdoor recreational facilities in the neighborhood. And again, Because we prioritize pedestrians, this allows us to do some things differently. We're not planning for large parking structures in the buildings. And so we're planning to then break down the blocks into smaller buildings that can be surrounded by pedestrian walkways. So you can most visibly see this here, where you have 5 small buildings with a courtyard. And what this means is that Silo Park is effectively extended into this area, integrated with the waterfront promenade, and goes all the way to the lake. And Quayside really is a crossroads. And to make it easy for everyone to get to the great new parks that I was mentioning at Villiers, we're proposing a bridge here that would extend directly from here to Promontory Park. And this bridge would be built into the dock wall to include a bleacher that terraces down to a floating walkway, giving people further ways to engage with the water. And then Queens Quay. This is a great street already on the western side of the city and the redevelopment that has happened there. And we envision extending that and having the fantastic boulevard continue here as well. The promenade would be extended on the south side. The Martin Goodman Trail, as I've mentioned, would be expanded to 5 meters. And then to create a more balanced public realm, one thing we're doing here is also proposing the Queens Quay in this section as a one-way, so that we have the north side have a sidewalk that's able to match and scale the south side. And right next to that, we would then have pedestrian walkways as the blocks here, again, because we're not building in these large parking structures, would be able to be broken down even more, creating more space for the community. So you put all of that together, and Quayside really improves the safety and efficiency of our streets. It creates an extraordinary public realm that's a network of green, blue, and paved areas that'll be a major asset for the entire city. And it's especially important for the neighbors to the north that have not had access to adequate parkland on the water. Now let's talk about the ground floors. We mentioned this a little bit already. These spaces are so important to our communities. These are the spaces of the local businesses and people that you get to know on a daily basis. And this is changing. Because of e-commerce, a lot of the sort of traditional shops are maybe more challenged. And so one of the things we want to do here is, as I said, take a different approach that treats these more as these open, flexible market spaces, and really also doesn't just focus on retail, but makes these spaces available for cultural, social, health, and social service organizations. So you really have a vibrant mix on your ground floors that is contributing to community life. And as we also talked about, our approach to innovation here isn't just about the things that you see. It's also the infrastructure that you cannot see. And so that includes the things like the geothermal heating and cooling. It includes the solar systems that I mentioned. And this really allows us to push towards climate positive. And as I've said, all the buildings in Quayside are planned to be built in mass timber. So this area will look unlike any other. The architectural opportunities of this really are fantastic. Timber has been shown to improve health and well-being by giving people a great sense of connection to nature. So overall, as you can tell, the building mix at Quayside is different than a traditional development. Zoning would permit towers up to 48 stories, but again, we're proposing to do something novel here in Toronto. We're not asking permission to exceed those height limits. Instead, we're focused on keeping to 30 stories, which is the max height that timber technology supports today. And so you put this all together, and this is what the current site program and plan looks like in comparison to what the current zoning would permit. If we had followed the current zoning, what you would have is potentially just another Toronto neighborhood that is primarily residential with a little bit of space devoted to other uses. Here again, we're proposing a very, very different breakdown. You would have over 30% of the space devoted to different uses beyond residential, and within that residential, 40% of that space devoted to below market housing. And the economic development impact here is very significant, with those 9,000 new construction jobs and the nearly 4,000 jobs that be located in the neighborhood. And again, I've said this a lot, but I just want to reiterate it. Our approach to Quayside does propose what is a very significant and a different approach to housing affordability that we think can have a huge impact as a model to hopefully be replicated in other parts of the city. That would be 20% of affordable housing meeting the official plan requirement, an additional 20% focused on middle income families, with half of the housing purpose-built rental. So we've talked now a lot about the plan and the initiatives. Let's now look at what some of these spaces might start to feel like. This is a drawing of what that future Parliament Plaza might be. This is the experience of when you're standing on Lakeshore, you've just crossed underneath the Gardner, and now you're actually confronted already with water. You have a water feature here at the middle that is able to allow for all ages play, for people to come together. You have the stoa spaces that are spilling out into this plaza space. You have a canopy that's protecting this environment from all seasons. That same canopy structure can allow for things to be suspended from it, allowing for public art installations and other community events. Overall, the space is sort of envisioned almost as like an open air theater where all sides of the space are flexible. This approach to Parliament Plaza does build on the existing precinct plan and the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan. It emphasizes the importance of significant destinations on the north-south streets, but it does propose important changes to the neighborhood roads. So this is an initial concept, and we want to make very, very clear that we're working closely with the city and Waterfront Toronto to begin analyzing alternatives. So just for your context, this is what the existing road network from the precinct plan does propose. It envisions filling in Parliament Slip and having Queens Quay extend as a roadway across that, and Parliament come down then at that intersection. This is then what we're kind of suggesting as initial concept would look like, where you do have Queens Quay as an area without any cars, as well as that Parliament space without any cars. We're then looking at alternatives now. Could Queens Quay continue as a road there and this all still be a great public space? Could Parliament continue down and still be a fantastic space? Could you still have the two roads together and create a fantastic space? We think that there's a real opportunity to do something extraordinary here, and we're very excited to work with Waterfront in the city to explore these alternatives. Here's then what Queens Quay now in this area might feel like standing on the north side. As I mentioned, we're considering a one-way here that allows us to have a much more generous sidewalk, similar to what you have on the south side of Queens Quay today on the western side of the waterfront. What this allows is a really different kind of pedestrian experience. You see here that this is a curbless street. There would be tactile indicators at the crosswalks to ensure accessibility for everyone, but the space is really designed for safer experience for the pedestrians. This also has significantly more tree plantings. This approach to Queens Quay would actually exceed the 40% tree canopy objectives that the city has set out, an incredibly ambitious number that we think is really exciting. And you also see some of the building raincoats that allow for weather protection in the seasons and these open stoa spaces connected to the street. This is then what that pedestrian walkway that I mentioned that is sort of right next to Queens Quay that is coming down and actually connects to a whole network of pedestrian walkways that are emerging from Yonge Street. This would come down and connect then into Parliament Plaza. This is sort of a main street for the neighborhood. It's something where you also have many safe spaces for kids to play. And now this is standing on those bridges, walking out to Villiers and sort of passing through the waterfront promenade. So this, we believe, is a really exciting moment, a really extraordinary type of opportunity to give people different access to in relationship to the water. You can see the bridge here ramping down to that floating walkway, a series of floating islands that allow for people to engage with the water in different ways. You have really great opportunities for water activation here, kayakers, sailboats, marine transit, all made possible in this area. All right, so that's it. That's a lot. That's the sort of summary of the draft site plan that we wanted to share with you today. Again, this really incorporates all of the previous roundtables and feedback from all the forms of engagement and really is building on the objectives and public policy outcomes that Waterfront Toronto has been putting forward for this project. Thank you very much. We look forward to more conversation.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Jesse. And if we could keep you up here, and if you'd like to invite Meg back up. Now it's time for question and answers. So we have about 10 minutes to answer some questions. I asked that if you could be really succinct in your questions and hold a commentary for the breakout rooms which we're going to actually move into. So there'll be plenty of time and opportunity to really share with the project teams what your feedback is. But if you have a question right now, if you want to raise up your hands, we have Maya and Harry that has roving mics that can take a few questions from the floor. Yeah. Oh, yep.
Hi there. Quick question to Waterfront Toronto. Glad to see your broad evaluation framework, but when you talk about the priority outcomes, or that you're looking at to assess the MDIP, I got that straight, is that you had nothing in there. It didn't see the piece around social infrastructure, complete communities. And I didn't see it in there, or did I miss it?
Absolutely, it's in there. That is one of the most important outcomes. It's contained probably in a couple of things, affordability and community services. I think there's a breakout session for both of those. The way to track it back to those things is the little colored icons on the slides. We'll track it back to our RFP requirements, which had the complete communities. So have a look for those little colored icons.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do you have something? Do you have a microphone down there? Gentleman back here. Yep, with the glasses.
Hey, quick question, Jesse. How does this connect to the planned Don River Valley Park?
So in terms of as I said, I think we think about this as sort of part of a network. And so the waterfront promenade here, Silo Park, the Parliament Slip, that proposed kind of Parliament Plaza space, in many ways, that's all one sort of integrated public realm. And then that bridge, as I suggested, provides a connection then to that new promontory park, the new Don River Park that is just beyond there. So it's really, in our minds, thinking about this as part of an integrated system that recognizes that extraordinary new park system and sees this as sort of building on that and providing connection for the people coming from the center of the city to those new parks and sort of beginning that park system here.
Thank you. Okay, I think, did you middle table there? Yeah.
Hello. So my question is surrounding the pollution that is currently a problem with Lake Ontario, especially because you have such easy access to the water. How will Sidewalk Toronto promote sustainability in terms of water pollution?
So, this project alone, I don't think can tackle that challenge, but we think it's really important to look at ways that this can introduce important elements to that. So one of the pieces is actually, in a detail of the design that I didn't call out, was looking at the Parliament Slip shoreline, not just being reconstructed dock wall. So one of the things in terms of biodiversity and the kind of ability for kind of fish habitats and other things is to look at kind of more riparian edges. There's this sort of a lot of the renaturalization that is already, being talked about on the Don River. Can we have some of those elements here in this smaller area? That's something that we're doing here that we think is really important. In terms of the ability for people to engage with the water, again, we want to give people the opportunity in small watercraft to get out there as easily as possible. We think that the more people actually understand and connect with the lake, the stronger the advocacy for improving the water quality will be. And that water feature that I mentioned in Parliament Plaza, that would itself actually be controlled water so that people's opportunities to have all ages play comes through that water source.
If I can add to that, the city is working very hard on redoing servicing in the waterfront, the combined sewer overflow systems, et cetera. So the city is already tackling some of this. And certainly Waterfront Toronto, similarly in Sherbourne Common, we take lake water and we clean it. We clean our storm water, et cetera. We follow the wet weather flow guidelines, which the city has established, all in an effort to try and improve the water quality in the Inner Harbour. I know that it's an objective of the cities. They could answer questions in a little bit more detail if you wanted on that. I'm sure they have stuff on their website as well.
Harry, I think there's a gentleman on the last row there. Oh, do we have, well, we'll go here first, sure.
Sure. Hi,
Yeah.
my question's for Meg. How much of the MIDP have you seen so far? And I understand this is going to be, like, how many 100 pages is that plan going to be?
Oh, I don't know exactly what the total count of pages will be.
But hundreds is right?
Yeah, it'll be a few hundred, right? I mean, each of these elements that Jesse talked about is going to have sort of a chapter in the document, and so there's a lot to talk about. There's some sort of historic stuff in there, why we're doing it. There's some research elements, and then there's some proposals. So we have seen some very draft chapters on a few of those elements. We haven't seen the whole thing. We don't anticipate seeing the whole thing until probably the end of January, which time we will take time to review and provide comments back before we go to the next step, which is to engage the government partners.
Okay, so from the farm committee, it was going to be done at the end of December. So now it's going to be, so you're not getting it as Waterfront Toronto until January?
Well, so the end of December, 1st of January, we should have the whole ball of wax by the first week back after
Can
Christmas.
you make it public as soon as you get it?
No, so we are going to review it and provide feedback based on our criteria, and it will be fully made public. But we need governments to have a look at it, because what we don't want to do is propose something. We don't want Sidewalk to propose something that the governments or ourselves say, A, that's not in keeping with what we're looking for, or B, we can't implement that. We can't change that policy. We can't make that happen. So we don't want to get people's hopes up for something that is a pipe dream. So no, we will be reviewing it first and giving feedback and then making it public.
Can I just say that we as the public would love that rigor if that plan had
Absolutely.
No, I mean, if you would just release it, and then if there was
We
a
will.
problem in there, that the government could say there's a problem after it's been released, not before. Just
you.
as a request.
Okay,
We have
thanks.
1 point from Jesse. Yeah.
Mic is on. Okay. If I could have one important thing, I think that what we're sharing today, just to be very clear, is largely content that is intended to be included in the MIDP. This is bringing this forward to the public early in the process. This is the content the Waterfront has been seeing and will be refined and further developed. But I want to be clear that what we're showing you today is work in progress for the MIDP itself. It is not sort of something different. This is what you're looking at and being asked to provide feedback on today.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a question for the gentleman here, last row? Oh, we'll go here, and I promise, sir, we'll go to you, okay?
All right, thank you. Mike York with the Carpenters Union. Wanted to just say, first of all, great presentation. Thank you very much. And Meg, a specific shout out to you. Very classy approach to the events of the last week. I think it's very good. It's transparent, and I really respect that.
Thank you. Thanks.
LaRose had said no comments, but I really couldn't help myself. All right, so to Jesse, someone like myself coming from construction, love the idea of tall timber, 9,000 construction jobs. However, we have a booming city right now where we got a lot of work underway. What are your plans and your thoughts and any comments you can make about reaching out to the next generation, the young men and women we want to come into our industry? What do we do about reaching out to them and ensuring they have a career and the training and the skills necessary to move forward?
That's great. So one of the pieces, and I encourage you also to meet. We have a lot of colleagues that are working very specifically on this here. Kareem Khalifa is one of the individuals leading our tall timber work in construction, and he'll be outside, and you can dive in more deeply with him. But one of the things around the economic development piece is actually really also focusing on workforce development and having a kind of workforce development initiative that builds on what Waterfront has already been doing, but working with the local trades, looking at that next generation. And one of the things, again, as I mentioned, it's really exciting about the timber construction. It's not just about the construction on site, it's the whole cycle of how buildings can be made differently now. And the opportunities for the design side, the opportunities for kind of the factory side, and then that location, and then what happens on site. And that whole system is one that we're really interested in and want to work with and grow the local community around.
Thank you. Okay, gentlemen, the last row, and then I think we have time for one more question after that.
Good morning. I've seen at previous sessions outdoor activities in the winter, and you've shown previously some ideas of how that might happen, but I didn't see it this morning, and I wondered if it has escaped you, given what we came through to get here today.
No, fair point. So that remains a really, really big priority. I mean, I think a big part of our whole approach to the neighborhood is that sort of year-round seasonal activities, really looking at how also the outdoor spaces can support activities in the winter. The drawing of Parliament Plaza showed it in the summer, but as I mentioned, the idea of a canopy there that allows for kind of protection of the elements around the seasons. You saw some of the building raincoats is one of the concepts that we're looking at for kind of more street conditions that allow for more activities across the shoulder seasons. And we actually really believe that it's also just about programming and working, and there's amazing work already happening now in the City of Toronto and the Parks, Forestry and Recreation, looking at how you animate spaces in the winter with diverse programming, and we want to make those types of opportunities possible here.
Thank you. Last question. Lady in back there. Yeah. Yeah, up, yeah, you. You say, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to know, I don't know, I came a little bit late, so I don't know if you spoke about it before, but are you going to buy the land from Toronto?
Let me start with that.
Yeah, sure.
So Quayside is primarily owned by Waterfront Toronto. There is a small portion owned by the city when roads get realigned. And the plan development agreement that we have with Sidewalk right now confers no land transfer. In all of our deals, we have opportunities to sell land, ground lease, or maintain in public ownership. So all of that will be part of the business case and the implementation analysis that will be proposed by Sidewalk and then analyzed by ourselves and our government partners. So we actually don't know the answer to that yet. But this, just to be clear, this isn't like some of our other developments where we're having large city pieces of land or large provincial pieces of land.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. There will be more time to ask questions in the breakout session. So I'm going to invite you to head into a particular breakout session. The Quayside site plan and transportation session will be in this room, and social infrastructure, housing affordability, digital governance, and sustainability are just right out the door to your left-hand side. And again, if you miss these sessions are 50 minutes long. And if you miss a particular session, they are repeated once again in about an hour's time. And then again, twice more this afternoon. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who joined the live stream. And have a great morning.